Hello there, shavelings. Somebody asked me to do a video about Alaya Vijnana, Storehouse consciousness in Yogacara Buddhism, and I'm not going to be able to do the definitive video about Alaya Vijnana, aka Storehouse consciousness, today, but I thought I'd do a little interim one in which I would kind of read to you a few things. So it's going to be sort of like story time in kindergarten. My girlfriend was teaching kindergarten a few years ago when I met her. So maybe that's where I'm getting influenced by. Anyhow, I already did a video about Yogacara Buddhism based mainly on this book, Living Yogacara by Tagawa Shune. And it's a real good book, very brief introduction, see how thin it is, to Yogacara Buddhism. Yogacara Buddhism is an interesting aspect of the Buddhist history to me because it's related to Zen, but Zen sort of superseded Yogacara in China and India. It had a brief flourishing moment in India and China where it was the biggest form of Buddhism, but then Zen kind of outstripped it. And a lot of the concepts of Yogacara Buddhism were kind of folded into the Zen form of Buddhism, but not overtly. Yogacara is extremely sort of intellectual. There's a lot to chew on intellectually in Yogacara Buddhism, whereas Zen is very direct and like, here you go, you just sit down, that's it. Sit down and shut up, as my second book was called. The Yogacara form of Buddhism, though, was, as it turns out, and I'm learning more and more about this all the time, kind of influential on the form of Zen that I ended up studying. And the reason is because Kodo Sawaki, who was extremely influential on both of the streams of Zen that I kind of got involved in, the one coming from Kobun Chino Otagawa Roshi and the one coming from Nishijima Gudo Roshi, they both stem from Kodo Sawaki's teachings, and Kodo Sawaki, although he was a Zen monk, studied Yogacara Buddhism for a number of years in his youth. So he was very well versed in the Yogacara philosophy and kind of brought it in there. But the Zen people tend to take Yogacara in a different direction. So in order to do this non-definitive video about Alaya Vijnana, Storehouse consciousness, which is one of the major concepts of Yogacara, I'm going to read to you a couple of things. The first comes from Kobun Chino Roshi's commentary on the Heart Sutra, and if I remember to, I'll put a link to it in the below below the video on YouTube. And here's what Kobun Chino says. Alaya Vijnana is the storehouse of all senses, all consciousness. It is phenomenal existence, so it is not God, and it is not something which never changes. It changes. It exists in time and space, very deep and very broad. Our mind covers it, and yet, when every knowledge, every understanding, every capacity is oriented by yourself, it is still blind. It can be compared to Plato's metaphor of the cave. You live in this kingdom alone. If the world is arranged from yourself, this Alaya Vijnana is the continuous growth of the kingdom in which only you are living. People appear, things appear, but they are not really understood. Vi means to divide, Jnana means knowledge, knowing. Because of our senses, by touching the cup, we can feel it. He's probably holding a cup when he's giving this lecture. This particular knowing is Vijnana. So to know is to discriminate. To not know is to not discriminate. But it is not ignorance. To not know is to accept the whole thing, not to ignore it. So not knowing is a kind of knowing. By discrimination you understand part of the whole. By no discrimination you cannot know in the sense of knowing, but you essentially know. This is why we have a little difficulty when someone approaches and wants to know, what are you thinking? How are you living? Finally, I get angry. Leave me alone, I say. And that's the way that ends. Kobun Chino's commentary on the Heart Sutra is broken up into sections, and I assume each section represents a different day's lecture, and that's where the lecture of that day ends. So without even commenting on that, because I think it's just beautiful the way it is, I'm going to read you a bit longer passage from The Wholehearted Way. This is Uchiyama Roshi's, Kosho Uchiyama Roshi's commentary on Eihei Dogen's Bendowa, which is one of his most famous piece of writings. It's a study on the practice of the way, or a talk on the practice of the way. This is longish, so bear with me and maybe just kind of sit back and enjoy it like a bunch of kindergartners. Our consciousnesses, eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, i.e. the five senses that cause the five perceptions, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, are called the first five consciousnesses. The sixth consciousness is called thought consciousness, shiki, or in Sanskrit, mano vijnana. The seventh is manas consciousness, manashiki, or manas vijnana. The eighth is alaya consciousness, alaya shiki, or alaya vijnana. The first version is Japanese and the second is Sanskrit. And the ninth is undefiled consciousness, anmarashiki, or in Sanskrit, amala vijnana. Thought consciousness is the function of thinking various things. Manas consciousness, which grasps individual life force as ego and sees things in an egocentric way, comes out of alaya consciousness. Alaya consciousness, that's again Storehouse consciousness, is, precisely speaking, individual life force rather than consciousness. Before, I said that mind, chitta, which means gathering and arising, is thought, which is transformed by various factors and wells up. What are the factors? Hereditary transmission from parents, individual circumstances in which we are born and grow up, and the fact of being born in Japan in the 20th century are all factors that together form our personality. He's giving this lecture in Japan in the 20th century. Furthermore, we depend on today's weather, temperature, and our physical condition. Today is a lot cooler than it was yesterday, so I'm kind of feeling that right now as I read this. All such factors together enable us to live as individual life forces. Alaya is this gathering and arising from immeasurable factors. Alaya is also called storehouse consciousness because all of our experiences are stored like seeds in it. Those seeds sprout sometime later and cause us to act in certain ways. There are two aspects to our lives. One is that various factors together bring about each thing as a result. Another is that we learn through each experience and we judge and do things based on what we have learned. This is the meaning of alaya consciousness, so I think alaya is our individual life force. From the alaya, manas consciousness arises. Mind is nothing but a collection of all the different accidental factors, and yet we grasp thoughts caused by accident, call them I, and attach ourselves to this. The function of perceiving the individual life force as ego is called manas consciousness. In Uishiki, the consciousness-only philosophy of the Yogacara school, it is said that manas consciousness consists of always together with ignorance opposing egolessness. That's the way it's written, and I read that 3 times before I even started this video. It's very weird grammar. Then he goes, Gachi, Sanskrit, atoma moba, a mistaken view of the existence of ego, gaken, Sanskrit, atoma drishti, arrogance based on ego, gaman, Sanskrit, atma mana, and ego attachment, gai, Sanskrit, atomo sneba, I guess. Manas consciousness brings about the dismantling mind called thought consciousness. Thought consciousness distinguishes one thing from another. It is not neutral distinction, but discriminates based on one's own point of view. We discriminate based on our desire for self-satisfaction. This doctrine of alaya, manas, and thought consciousness means nothing more or less than that we see everything in the world through our desire for self-satisfaction. In terms of Western psychology, the first 5 consciousnesses are sense and perceptions. The 6th is usual consciousness, what you usually think of as consciousness. The 7th is so-called self-consciousness, and the 8th is the unconscious or subconscious. In Buddhism, these together are explained as the source of desire for self-satisfaction. This is the theory of Uishiki of the Yogacara school. In Shingon teaching, a 9th undefiled consciousness is posited. It was thought that the 8th consciousness is nothing other than the force of great nature, that is, life which is connected with the whole universe. And it goes on from there, and he kind of explains more, but the basic deal with that is if you don't understand it, don't worry about it. That's the way the Zen school treats these things. We kind of take them as interesting theories which might be useful, but we know that all theories are incomplete. So any theory you get is not going to be exactly what the thing is. it helps to kind of have these theories, and I find that the Buddhist theories of mind are very, very good and very precise, and in fact much more precise and much better and much more complete than Western theories of consciousness and mind. I don't think the Western theories of consciousness and mind have yet reached to where the Buddhists got about 1,000 years ago, and it's funny that people who are steeped in Western theory of mind will look at Buddhism as if it's like something primitive, which I think is kind of hilarious, but there you go. And so it's good to have these ideas, it's good to have an understanding of this stuff. But you don't have to really worry about memorizing it or figuring it out or keeping it in mind. I certainly don't. I barely understand this stuff myself. I can just sort of kind of get it. So anyway, I'm just offering that to the people who want to know, and pick up this book, The Wholehearted Way. It teaches you a lot of stuff about that. Or get yourself a copy of Living Yogacara. It'll tell you more about that stuff. Maybe I'll put it in my next book too. I think because a lot of people are interested in it, I'm going to squeeze it in there somewhere, at least my version of it, but don't worry about it, essentially. Anyway, if you want to help me not worry about things, you can send me a donation at the link that you are seeing below on your screen, or if you're on YouTube, there are direct links to my Patreon and PayPal pages. That is how I make most of my living these days, and it's really nice that so many people are continuously contributing, and I'm always glad to have those contributions. If you're having financial trouble, you don't need to donate to me. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine because other people are donating, and I thank you very much. And if you want to become one of those people, I thank you very much too. We'll see you later. Have a good time all the time. Bye.